Friedrich Nietzsche discovered one truth that would destroy everything humanity believed about morality, religion, and meaning itself. What took him 44 years of tortured existence to learn? I will teach you in the next 30 minutes. This is the philosopher who declared God is dead and meant it literally. The man who wrote his most famous work while wandering the mountains of Switzerland, battling migraines so severe he could barely see the page in front of him. Nietzsche spent the last 11 years of his life in complete mental collapse, unable to recognize his own mother, his mind shattered by the very ideas he unleashed upon the world. Yet his philosophy would go on to influence everyone from Sigmund Freud to Albert Camus, from Carl Jung to Michel Foucault. His ideas shaped existentialism, postmodernism, and the entire trajectory of 20th century thought. By the end of this video, you will understand why Nietzsche believed traditional morality is a lie designed to keep you weak. You will learn his solution for creating meaning in a universe without God, and you will discover how to apply his philosophy to escape the resentment, conformity, and mediocrity that trap most people in modern society. But first, you need to understand the man behind these dangerous ideas. Friedrich Nietzsche was born in 1844 in a small Prussian village, the son of a Lutheran pastor. His father died when Nietzsche was only 4 years old, leaving him to grow up in a household dominated by his mother, grandmother, and 2 aunts. 5 women raising 1 boy in the strict religious atmosphere of 19th century Germany. Every Sunday, young Friedrich attended church. Every evening, prayers before bed. The entire structure of his childhood was built on the foundation of Christian morality, duty, and obedience. He excelled academically, became a professor of philology at the University of Basel at the absurdly young age of 24, before he had even completed his doctorate. But something was breaking inside him. The more he studied ancient Greek culture, the more he realized that Christian morality was not universal, not eternal, not natural. It was invented, constructed, a historical accident that had conquered Europe and convinced everyone it was divine truth. Then came the health problems, crushing migraines that would last for days, vomiting spells, vision problems so severe he could barely read. He resigned from his professorship at 34, spending the next decade wandering through Switzerland and Italy, living in boarding houses, writing in notebooks, slowly going blind. He had no wife, no family, few friends, just his thoughts and the mountains. But in that decade before his collapse, between 1878 and 1888, Nietzsche produced some of the most radical philosophy ever written. He did not just criticize religion. He performed an autopsy on Western civilization itself, dissecting every value, every belief, every assumption we hold sacred. And what he found underneath was not pretty. He found resentment masquerading as virtue. He found weakness disguised as humility. He found a slave morality that had conquered the world by convincing the powerful to despise their own strength. This is why his philosophy matters even more today than it did in his own time. We live in an age drowning in therapeutic language, safe spaces, and victimhood culture. An age where people compete to be the most oppressed, the most traumatized, the most in need of protection. Nietzsche saw this coming 150 years ago. He understood that when you teach people to find their identity in suffering, when you make weakness into a virtue, you do not liberate them. You imprison them in resentment forever. Now let me show you exactly how his philosophy works, starting with the concept that explains everything else he ever wrote. Nietzsche believed that the fundamental drive of all living things is not survival, not pleasure, not happiness, but power. He called this the will to power, not power over others necessarily, though that can be part of it. Power over yourself, power over your circumstances, power over reality itself. Every action you take, every choice you make, every thought you think is an expression of your will to expand, to grow, to overcome resistance and become more than you currently are. Here is Nietzsche in his own words from Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Wherever I found the living, there I found will to power. And even in the will of those who serve, I found the will to be master. Life itself told me this secret. Behold, it said, I am that which must always overcome itself. But what does this actually mean? Most philosophers before Nietzsche tried to identify some universal human motivation. Epicurus said we seek pleasure. Schopenhauer said we are driven by a blind will to live. Freud would later say we are controlled by sexual desire and aggression. But Nietzsche saw something deeper. He noticed that people will choose struggle over comfort, pain over pleasure, danger over safety, as long as it makes them feel powerful. A mountain climber suffers through exhaustion and risk, not in spite of the difficulty, but because of it. An entrepreneur works 80-hour weeks, not because it is pleasant, but because building something from nothing is an expression of power. Even someone who chooses to serve others is exercising power over their own desires, proving they have the strength to sacrifice. The will to power is not about domination, it is about self-overcoming. It is the drive to take what you are and transform it into something greater. Nietzsche despised people who blamed their circumstances, who made excuses, who accepted their limitations as permanent. He saw this as a denial of life itself, because life is struggle, life is constant overcoming. The moment you stop growing, you start dying. This contradicts almost everything modern psychology teaches. We are told to accept ourselves, to practice self-compassion, to be gentle with our flaws. But Nietzsche would call this a slow form of suicide. He would say you are lying to yourself, constructing a philosophy that justifies your weakness, making peace with mediocrity because the alternative requires too much effort. The will to power demands that you never make peace with who you are, that you constantly wage war against your own limitations. Think about the last time you faced a difficult challenge. Maybe you were offered a promotion that would require you to learn entirely new skills. Maybe a relationship demanded that you become more vulnerable, more honest, more emotionally available than you had ever been before. Maybe you had the opportunity to move to a new city, start a new career, reinvent yourself completely. What did you do? Most people retreat. They construct elaborate rationalizations for why staying comfortable is actually the wise choice. They say they are being realistic, being responsible, being mature, but Nietzsche would see through this immediately. He would recognize it as the will to power turning against itself, choosing safety over growth, choosing the illusion of control over the reality of transformation. You are not being wise, you are being afraid. Now consider what happens when you understand this. The same challenging situation appears, but you see it through the lens of the will to power. That promotion is not just more responsibility, it is an opportunity to expand your capacities, to prove you can master new domains, to exercise power over your own fear of failure. That relationship is not just emotional risk. It is a chance to overcome your defensive patterns, to become someone capable of deeper connection. That move to a new city is not just inconvenience. It is liberation from the person you have been, permission to recreate yourself entirely. Same situation, different philosophy, completely different choice. Tonight, before you go to sleep, write down 3 things about yourself that you have accepted as permanent limitations. Maybe you tell yourself you are not creative. Maybe you say you are bad with money. Maybe you believe you will always struggle with confidence or discipline or communication. Pick one of these supposed limitations and commit to destroying it over the next 30 days, not improving it, not managing it, destroying it completely through deliberate practice. What you will notice is that the limitation was never real. It was just a story you told yourself, a way of avoiding the discomfort of change. When you exercise your will to power against it, it dissolves. This brings us directly to Nietzsche's most famous and most misunderstood idea, the concept that made him infamous, that got him blamed for Nazi ideology decades after his death. that still makes people uncomfortable today. The Übermensch. The word is usually translated as Superman or Overman, but both translations miss the point. Nietzsche was not describing a superhero or a genetic superior. He was describing a type of person who has overcome the need for external validation, who creates their own values instead of inheriting them from society, who says yes to life even in the face of suffering and meaninglessness. The Übermensch is what humanity could become if we stopped lying to ourselves. Nietzsche writes in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, I teach you the Übermensch. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? All beings so far have created something beyond themselves, and you want to be the ebb of this great flood, and even go back to the beasts rather than overcome man. But what does this actually mean? For most of human history, people derived their values from religion. God commanded certain actions and forbade others. Morality was simple because it came from an external, absolute authority. You did not need to figure out what was right or wrong. You just needed to obey. But Nietzsche declared that God is dead, and he meant it sociologically, not theologically. He meant that European culture had killed God through the Enlightenment, through science, through rational inquiry. We had made it impossible to truly believe in divine authority anymore, even if we still went through the motions. But here is the problem. When God dies, morality dies with him. There is no longer any cosmic rule book telling you how to live. And most people cannot handle this freedom. They panic. They look for substitutes. They replace God with political ideology, with social approval, with scientific materialism, with anything that will tell them what to do so they do not have to decide for themselves. Nietzsche called this the last man, the opposite of the Übermensch. The last man is the person who just wants comfort, who just wants to fit in, who has given up on greatness and settled for a safe, pleasant, meaningless existence. The Übermensch is the person who embraces the death of God as liberation, who says, if there is no cosmic meaning, then I will create meaning. If there is no divine morality, then I will determine my own values. If there is no purpose given to me by the universe, then I will invent purpose through my actions. This is not nihilism. This is the opposite of nihilism. Nihilism is saying nothing matters. The Übermensch says nothing matters objectively, so I will make it matter subjectively through the force of my will. The Übermensch does not wait for permission, does not seek consensus, does not need society to validate their choices. They stand alone if necessary, living by principles they have forged themselves, answerable only to their own conscience. This is terrifying for most people because it requires total responsibility. You can no longer blame God, or society, or your parents, or your trauma. You are the sole author of your life. Think about how you make decisions right now. When you face a moral dilemma, what do? Most likely, you look around to see what other people think. You check social media to gauge the acceptable opinion. You remember what you were taught in childhood. You consider what would make you look good to others. You are outsourcing your moral judgment to external authorities, just like people once outsourced it to priests. The Übermensch would do the opposite. They would turn inward and ask, what do I actually value? Not what I have been told to value, not what will gain approval, but what I genuinely believe is worth pursuing. They would construct their answer from first principles, testing it against reality, revising it as they gain experience. They would take full ownership of their choices, accepting that they might be wrong, accepting that others might condemn them, accepting that this is the price of authenticity. Same situation, different philosophy, completely different outcome. This week, identify one area where you are still operating on inherited values rather than chosen ones. Maybe you are pursuing a career your parents wanted for you. Maybe you are staying in a relationship because society says you should. Maybe you hold political beliefs you have never actually examined. Pick one inherited value and interrogate it ruthlessly. Ask yourself, do I actually believe this? Or am I just performing belief to avoid conflict? If you stripped away all external judgment, all social pressure, all fear of disapproval, would you still choose this? Be honest, most of what you think you believe is just cultural programming. The Übermensch strips away the programming and stands naked in their own truth, whatever that turns out to be. Now we arrive at the concept that makes Nietzsche truly dangerous to comfortable people: eternal recurrence. Imagine that every moment of your life will repeat infinitely. Every choice you make, you will make again. Every pain you suffer, you will suffer again. Every joy you experience, you will experience again. The same conversations, the same mistakes, the same triumphs, the same mediocrity, playing on an endless loop for eternity. Not as metaphor, not as symbolic thought experiment, as literal, inescapable reality, Nietzsche poses this in The Gay Science. What if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, "This life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence." Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? But what does this actually mean? Nietzsche is not making a cosmological claim about the structure of the universe. He is proposing a psychological test. The question is not whether eternal recurrence is true. The question is, how would you react if it were true? Would you despair? Would you feel trapped? Would you curse the demon and wish for oblivion, or would you embrace it? Would you say, "Yes, I would live this life again, exactly as it was, with all its suffering and failure and disappointment, because it was mine and I chose it"? This is the ultimate measure of whether you have achieved what Nietzsche calls amor fati, love of fate. Most people live in quiet resentment of their lives. They wish their past had been different. They regret their choices. They blame circumstances for their disappointments. They fantasize about starting over, doing it right this time, avoiding the mistakes. But this is a form of self-rejection. You are saying your life, as it actually unfolded, was not good enough. You are wishing you were someone else. Eternal recurrence forces you to confront this self-rejection. If you had to live your exact life infinitely, with no ability to change anything, would you accept it? The person who can say yes to eternal recurrence is the person who has achieved total self-affirmation. They do not wish away their suffering because that suffering made them who they are. They do not regret their failures because those failures taught them essential lessons. They do not fantasize about alternative paths because they are fully committed to the path they chose. This connects back to the will to power and the Übermensch. The Übermensch is the person who can embrace eternal recurrence without flinching, who loves their fate so completely that they would choose to live it again, infinitely, without changing a single moment. This is the highest possible affirmation of life. Think about your biggest regret, the relationship that ended badly, the career opportunity you missed, the person you hurt, the years you wasted. Now imagine you will experience that regret infinitely. Same pain, same shame, same sense of loss, repeating forever. Your first instinct is probably horror. You would give anything to change that moment, to undo that mistake, to have chosen differently. But now shift your perspective. What if that regret was necessary? What if the person you are today, with all your hard-won wisdom and depth of character, could only exist because you experienced that pain? What if changing that moment would erase everything valuable you have become? The question eternal recurrence asks is not whether you want to repeat that moment. The question is whether you are grateful it happened because it was the price of becoming yourself. Same regret, different philosophy, completely different emotional relationship to your past. Tonight, before you sleep, conduct this thought experiment honestly. Review your life year by year, every success and failure, every relationship and loss, every choice good and bad. Then ask yourself, if I had to live this exact life on infinite repeat, never changing a single detail, would I accept? If the answer is no, you have work to do. Eternal recurrence reveals everywhere you have not yet achieved self-affirmation. Everywhere you are still in conflict with reality. Everywhere you are still wishing you were someone else. Your task is to transform your relationship to those moments until you can honestly say, yes, I would choose this again because this is who I am. This leads directly into what might be Nietzsche's most controversial insight: master morality versus slave morality. Nietzsche argues that there are two fundamentally different ways of creating moral values. Master morality is the morality of the strong. It begins with self-affirmation. The masters look at themselves, at their own power and vitality and creativity, and declare this is good. Everything that expresses strength, courage, nobility, pride, and independence is valuable. Everything that expresses weakness, cowardice, humility, and dependence is bad. The masters create values based on what they are. Slave morality is the morality of the weak. It begins with resentment. The slaves look at the masters and feel powerless, inferior, dominated. But instead of accepting this or working to become stronger, they perform a psychological trick. They invert the values. They declare that everything the masters possess, strength and pride and independence, is actually evil. And everything the slaves possess, weakness and humility and dependence, is actually good. They call their weakness meekness and claim it is a virtue. They call their inability to take revenge forgiveness and claim it is moral superiority. They call their powerlessness humility and claim God loves them for it. Nietzsche writes in on the genealogy of morals, the slave revolt in morality begins when resentment itself becomes creative and gives birth to values. The resentment of those who are denied the real reaction, that of the deed, and who compensate with an imaginary revenge. But what does this actually mean? Nietzsche is making a historical claim about the origin of Christian morality. He argues that Christianity is slave morality that conquered the Roman Empire. The early Christians were the weak, the poor, the oppressed. They could not defeat their Roman masters through strength, so they defeated them through a moral revolution. They convinced everyone that the meek shall inherit the earth, that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven, that blessed are the poor in spirit. They turned suffering into virtue, weakness into holiness, resentment into divine justice, and it worked. Within 300 years, Christianity had conquered Rome. The slaves had defeated the masters without ever winning a battle. They did it by changing the rules of the game, by making strength evil and weakness good, by weaponizing guilt and shame until the powerful despised their own power. Nietzsche saw this same dynamic everywhere in modern society, in socialism, which champions the poor against the rich, in feminism, which champions the oppressed against the oppressor, in therapeutic culture, which champions the traumatized against the healthy, in every ideology that locates moral authority in victimhood rather than virtue, in suffering rather than strength, in weakness rather than power. All of it, Nietzsche would argue, is slave morality in disguise, resentment dressed up as compassion. This is why he is so controversial. He is not just criticizing religion. He is criticizing the moral foundation of modern progressivism itself. He is saying that when you make victimhood into an identity, when you base your entire moral framework on who has been harmed, you do not liberate people. You trap them in permanent resentment. You teach them to find their power in their powerlessness, their pride in their shame, their virtue in their weakness. And once they internalize this, they can never overcome it, because overcoming it would mean giving up their source of moral authority. Think about how moral arguments work in modern discourse. Someone presents their identity as a victim, their history of suffering, their marginalization, and this is treated as giving them moral authority on the issue. If you have not suffered in the same way, you are told to listen, to defer, to center their voice. Your own perspective is dismissed as coming from privilege, from power, from a position of not understanding. Suffering becomes the credential that legitimizes speech. Now apply Nietzsche's analysis. What is actually happening here? Is this about justice, or is it about resentment? Are we trying to help people overcome their suffering, or are we teaching them to weaponize it? Are we empowering the weak, or are we just inverting the hierarchy so that weakness itself becomes power? Nietzsche would say this is slave morality in its purest form. We have made suffering into virtue, victimhood into identity, and resentment into righteousness. And we have convinced ourselves this is progress. Same social phenomenon, different philosophy, completely different interpretation. This week, pay attention to how often moral arguments in your life are based on suffering rather than values. How often someone claims to be right because they have been hurt. How often you grant authority to pain rather than wisdom. How often weakness is presented as virtue. Then ask yourself, what would master morality look like in this situation? What if instead of competing to be the most oppressed, we competed to be the most strong? What if instead of finding identity in trauma, we found identity in overcoming trauma? What if instead of weaponizing our pain, we transformed it into power? This does not mean ignoring suffering. It means refusing to make suffering the center of your identity. The final concept is the one that terrifies people most. The death of God and the rise of nihilism. When Nietzsche wrote that God is dead, he was not celebrating. He was warning. He understood that God was not just a theological concept. God was the foundation of meaning, morality, and purpose for Western civilization. God gave life objective significance. God made your actions matter on a cosmic scale. God meant that suffering had meaning, that justice would prevail, that death was not the end. When you remove God, you remove all of this at once. Nietzsche writes in The Gay Science, God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives? Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? But what does this actually mean? Nietzsche saw that science and reason had made traditional religious belief impossible for intellectually honest people. You could not study biology and believe in the literal Garden of Eden. You could not study astronomy and believe in a heaven above the clouds. You could not study history and believe God intervened to save the faithful. The Enlightenment had killed God, and there was no bringing him back. But most people did not understand what they had done. They kept going to church, kept using Christian moral language, kept acting as if objective morality existed even though they had destroyed its foundation. Nietzsche called this cultural Christianity. People who no longer believe but still cling to the moral framework because they are terrified of what comes after. What comes after is nihilism, the recognition that life has no inherent meaning. Your existence is an accident. Your values are arbitrary. Your suffering serves no purpose. One day you will die and be forgotten, and nothing you did will have mattered. This is the abyss that opens when God dies. Most people cannot look into it. They construct comforting lies, substitute religions, anything to avoid the terror of meaninglessness. But Nietzsche insisted we must look into the abyss. We must fully experience the nihilism that comes from the death of God, because only by passing through nihilism can we reach the other side. Only by accepting that life has no cosmic meaning can we become strong enough to create our own meaning. This is why he invented the Übermensch, why he preached the will to power, why he commanded us to embrace eternal recurrence. These are the tools for surviving nihilism and coming out stronger. The death of God is not a tragedy. It is an opportunity. It means you are free, free to create your own values, free to define your own purpose, free to become who you choose to be without needing cosmic permission. But freedom is terrifying, which is why most people reject it and spend their lives searching for someone to tell them what to do. Think about what gives your life meaning right now: your career, your relationships, your hobbies, your political beliefs. Now imagine you are on your deathbed, minutes from death, and you look back on all of it. Did it matter? Really? Will the universe be different because you existed? Will anyone remember you in 100 years? Will your accomplishments survive you? For most people, the honest answer is no. And when they confront this, they feel the abyss opening beneath them. But here is what Nietzsche understood. The fact that nothing matters objectively does not mean nothing matters subjectively. Yes, you will die and be forgotten. Yes, the universe does not care about your existence. Yes, your suffering serves no cosmic purpose. But in the face of all that, you can still choose to create meaning through your actions. You can still choose to live with intensity, passion, and purpose. You can still choose to say yes to life, even though life says nothing back. Same existential situation. Different philosophy, completely different response. This week, practice living as if God is dead, not as a theological statement, but as an experiment. Make a decision, any decision, without appealing to any external authority. Do not ask what God wants, what society expects, what your parents would approve of, what the correct answer is according to some moral system. Just ask what you want, what you genuinely, honestly, without self-deception want. Then choose that and take full responsibility for the choice. What you will discover is that freedom is both exhilarating and terrifying. You are finally living as yourself. But you have no one to blame if it goes wrong. Now here is where Nietzsche gets controversial, where his philosophy reveals its dark side and its limitations. The first criticism is the most serious. Nietzsche's ideas were hijacked by the Nazis. His sister, Elisabeth, was married to an anti-Semite and edited his work after his death to emphasize nationalistic and racialist themes. The Nazis presented Nietzsche as a prophet of German supremacy, the philosopher of the master race. They used his concept of the Übermensch to justify their ideology of Aryan superiority. They used his attack on Christian morality to excuse their cruelty. To this day, many people associate Nietzsche with fascism. But this is a complete misreading. Nietzsche despised German nationalism. He despised anti-Semitism. He called Germans barbarians and said the Jews were a superior people. He attacked the state as the coldest of all cold monsters. Everything the Nazis stood for, Nietzsche explicitly rejected. The problem is that his philosophy is dangerous in the hands of people who lack wisdom. If you teach the will to power to someone who confuses power over others with power over self, you create a tyrant. If you teach master morality to someone who is already cruel, you remove the restraints that kept them from acting on their cruelty. The second criticism comes from moral philosophers. They argue that Nietzsche destroys morality entirely. If there is no God, no objective values, no universal rules, then anything is permitted. Murder is not really wrong. Torture is not really evil. These are just subjective preferences, and the strong can ignore them if they choose. Nietzsche's philosophy, they say, leads inevitably to moral relativism and then to barbarism. Nietzsche would respond that Christian morality is the true barbarism. It is a system designed to make the strong feel guilty for their strength, to make the healthy feel guilty for their health, to make the talented feel guilty for their talent. It weaponizes guilt and shame to control people, to make them docile, to prevent them from becoming who they could be. His philosophy does not destroy morality. It destroys false morality so that genuine morality can emerge, morality based on strength and affirmation rather than weakness and resentment. But the critics have a point. Nietzsche gives you tools for overcoming yourself, for creating meaning, for affirming life. But he does not tell you what meaning to create. He does not give you a moral framework. He just tells you to be strong and free and authentic. What if your authentic self is cruel? What if your will to power expresses itself through domination? What if you affirm a life of harming others? Nietzsche has no good answer to this except to say that the truly strong do not need to dominate the weak, because they have more interesting challenges to pursue. The third criticism is psychological. Nietzsche demands that you take full responsibility for yourself, that you overcome all weakness, that you create meaning in a meaningless universe, that you affirm every moment of your life, including the suffering. This is an almost superhuman standard. Most people cannot meet it. Most people need community, need compassion, need forgiveness for their failures. Nietzsche's philosophy works for rare individuals who are capable of extreme self-discipline and self-creation. For everyone else, it is just crushing pressure to be stronger than they can be. Nietzsche knew this. He knew most people would remain what he called the herd, following comfortable beliefs, seeking easy pleasures, avoiding difficult truths. He was not writing for them. He was writing for the few who had the stomach for his ideas, who could handle the responsibility of freedom, who would rather suffer meaningfully than live comfortably. His philosophy is elitist by design. He makes no apology for this. The final criticism is existential. Even if you accept everything Nietzsche teaches, even if you become the Übermensch who creates your own values and affirms eternal recurrence, you still die. You still suffer. You still watch everyone you love disappear into nothing. Nietzsche gives you a way to say yes to all of this, to embrace it as beautiful and necessary. But he does not take away the pain. He does not make death less final. He just teaches you to accept it. And for many people, acceptance is not enough. They want redemption. They want meaning beyond themselves. They want to believe their existence matters to something larger than their own will. Nietzsche offers them nothing. These criticisms are serious. They reveal the limits of his philosophy. But they also reveal its power, because unlike most philosophers, Nietzsche does not offer comfort. He offers truth as he sees it, no matter how harsh. He does not tell you what you want to hear. He tells you what you need to hear if you want to become free. We have covered Nietzsche's 5 core ideas: the will to power, the drive to overcome yourself and expand your capacities; the Übermensch, the person who creates their own values in a world without God; eternal recurrence, the test of whether you can fully affirm your life exactly as it is; master morality versus slave morality, the difference between strength-based values and resentment-based values; and the death of God, the recognition that we must create meaning ourselves because no cosmic meaning exists. You started this video thinking Nietzsche was a nihilist who preached despair. Now you understand that Nietzsche actually believed life is so valuable that we must say yes to it even without God, even without cosmic purpose, even without redemption. He is not a nihilist, he is the anti-nihilist. He is the philosopher who found a way to affirm existence in the face of meaninglessness. This changes everything about how you approach suffering. Christian morality teaches you that suffering is meaningful because it brings you closer to God, because it tests your faith, because you will be rewarded in heaven. When God dies, suffering loses this meaning. It becomes pointless pain, but Nietzsche gives you a different answer. Suffering is the mechanism of growth. Every challenge you overcome makes you stronger. Every pain you endure deepens your character. Suffering is not meaningful because it serves some cosmic purpose. It is meaningful because you transform it into meaning through your response. This changes everything about how you approach freedom. Most people are terrified of freedom because freedom means responsibility. As long as God exists, you can blame God for the rules. As long as society tells you what to do, you can blame society for your choices. But when you truly accept that you are free, when you truly accept that there is no script you are supposed to follow, You realize that every moment of your life is your own creation. This is terrifying, but it is also exhilarating. You are not trapped in someone else's story. You are writing your own. This changes everything about how you approach your past. Most people carry enormous guilt and regret about their mistakes. They wish they had chosen differently, lived differently, been different people. This is a form of self-rejection. Eternal recurrence teaches you to embrace your past completely, to see every mistake as necessary, to affirm even your failures as part of what made you who you are. When you can do this, you free yourself from the burden of regret. You stop wishing you were someone else and become fully who you are. If this philosophy resonates with you, next watch my video on Albert Camus, who took these ideas even further and built an entire philosophy of rebellion on the foundation Nietzsche created. Camus agreed that life is absurd, that there is no cosmic meaning, but he asked a different question. Not whether we can affirm life in the face of meaninglessness, but whether we can be happy anyway, whether we can rebel against the absurdity through joy rather than despair. If Nietzsche's ideas challenged you, if they made you uncomfortable, if they forced you to question beliefs you have never questioned before, then hit that like button and subscribe. Leave a comment telling me which concept hit you hardest. Was it the will to power, the death of God? Eternal recurrence, I want to know where you are in your own philosophical journey. I leave you with Nietzsche's most powerful words from Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. Find your why, create your values, become who you are. That is the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche.